Hey, what's up, guys? You are listening to the Edge and Flow podcast, which you probably already know. I'm Lucas Burnley, and I'm here with my co-host TJ Schwartz. I'm doing like a real smooth jazz voice today.
I like it.
How's it going, TJ?
I'm doing great. Been changing way covers on one of the machines, and that's always fun. Covered in oil and chips and sharp little, hardened, hard milling type chips. So
Yeah,
it's always a thing. But happy to
and
be
run into
here.
the office.
Yep.
I ran 20 minutes late, and because I didn't put this on my schedule, and falls right in line with what we were talking about last time, which is multitasking and how many ports you have.
Right.
So
Putting a power strip on one of your two
yeah,
plugs,
I need
and
a
then putting another
backup.
power strip on that one. No.
Yep. Yeah, this
Yeah.
was today, man. We were talking about it's like I've just been running around putting out fires. It's been meetings and then jump from meetings into like lasering tags for ODCs and then dropping them off. And I just got out of order
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah, it
here we
happens.
are. But we have something pretty good to talk about. I mean, good for you and me. I don't know if anybody else will enjoy it, but
Right.
production mindset versus custom mindset. No,
Yeah,
production
R&D.
mindset. Oh yeah, okay. Production versus R&D mindset.
Right. And
Like slipped into it already.
let's think about this too. Like when we say production mindset, we're talking about let's say for you have a Quaken.
Yep.
You're not gonna most people wouldn't call that production when you go make a
Right.
batch of Quakens, like you're a
Right.
custom maker.
Right.
So production can be custom knife making, but it's like you
Right.
can either make 10 Quakens tomorrow,
Right.
or you can design a new knife tomorrow, build new fixtures, develop a new something. And that's a decision you have to make whether you're a custom maker or if you're bench made. You know what I mean?
Totally. Right. So it is a decision on your workflow for a given period of time. Am I
Right.
in a production mindset, meaning I'm doing production run of whatever that thing is,
Hmm.
small scale to large scale?
Right.
Or am I in the process of researching and or developing a new product?
Yeah, and being one man shows, pretty much you and I,
Right.
it's like we have to choose. We don't have a team. We don't have people that are developing new products while we have like a shop foreman who's doing that.
Oh,
So that's
sounds
where,
real good though.
right, that's where we get in that position of like choosing. And
Right.
so
Yeah, I got
how
to
do you
put my
do that?
go from the shop, run upstairs, put my button up on, and sit down at my computer.
Right,
That's the
because
engineering department.
no kidding. Then go back down, put your overalls on, and get the broom out,
Yeah,
and
get the broom out. Yep,
yep,
that's it.
yep, bounce around,
Everything else in the
all
shop.
the hats. Yep.
Yeah. So it's fun because you and I right now we're almost in just opposite camps, right? Out of necessity. Like
Right.
you are in kind of a production mode and I'm trying to figure out how to get back into R&D mode.
Mhm.
So yeah, man, like, what do you
Yeah,
think?
so I made a decision. It's parallel to this conversation. It's not the whole of it, but I made a decision this week. I've been waffling on it back and forth. You've probably heard me talk about it on the podcast, but I'm a knife manufacturer. I'm calling myself that now. I know it's a one-man shop, but it may not always be. But I now have two machines, and the way I'm looking at things and the way I'm setting up my shop, I have to be honest with myself. Like I'm becoming a manufacturer, whether I like it or not. And when I really say it out loud, like I do like it when I just embrace it. You know what I mean? Because it's almost like for a year, I've been setting up this shop that way. And I've been like, well, I'm a
Right.
custom maker, but I'm just doing it the manufacturing way. And then at a point,
Right.
I'm like, wait a minute, that is what it is. Like,
Well, when somebody asks you what you do for a living, you probably say I'm a knife maker,
right.
custom knife maker.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. But at some point,
Interesting.
it's like saying I'm a custom knife maker or I own a knife company, and it kind of
Right.
comes across differently. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I've always struggled with that. The ability to make that distinction, even if it's only for yourself, man, I think that's actually huge.
Yeah. So
Right.
it's parallel to this because right now I'm hardcore in the output production. Maybe production is
Ooh.
the wrong word because we're putting two definitions on the same word. Just like uh, doing work versus doing R&D. It's like doing versus thinking in a sense
Doing
is what we were
right,
talking
right,
about
right. They're
today.
yeah,
Yeah, but I'm definitely in a hardcore like doing mode, and I have been for the last year more so than R&D. And so what it is like, how can I make more knives? How can I make them better?
right.
And
Tangible output is measured in tangible product
yeah,
as opposed to
IP, intellectual
IP.
property.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so,
man, that's a big it's a big step, and it's not maybe somebody listening like that. There's like a distinction where you're like, well, you make things like that's
yeah,
not. But as a maker, the ability to like explain it to yourself in a way that gives you some guiding principles, how you frame your work, I think allows you to make decisions on how you proceed moving forward.
hmm
Goals, you know, I mean, there really is a lot tied into it, and it's also, I mean, there's like some emotions that come in there too because you're
hmm
essentially like putting your flag in the ground.
yeah. Well, and I think what tipped the scale for me is I've been listening to the Business and Machining podcast a lot recently, which is
Mm-hmm.
John Saunders and John Grimsmo, the two Johns, and they're
Mm-hmm.
like Grimsmo knives.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't say, like I don't think he calls himself a custom knife maker.
Right.
He calls him it's a knife company. It's a knife manufacturer. Like that's him. Even though you can look it back when he was in a garage with a Tormach and you
Right.
can say, and I can't say that what he's doing is what I want to do necessarily. Like
Sure. Sure.
I don't idolize that exact set of goals, but
Right.
the mindset of like when I listen to those two talk and that is how my brain is working a lot more so than like when I picture planning on being a one man shop for like let's say the next 30 years. Like that
Mm-hmm.
isn't what fires my cylinders. It's
Right.
more like the idea of running a shop. You know what I mean? Like that is
Right.
what's activating
Well,
my
it's
interest.
in a way it's yeah, it's manufacturing versus making, and that's like a very makery thing to say,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Because
exactly.
you have to understand like the difference. Like we're talking scale, process, and essentially how your day is spent,
hmm
right?
Yeah.
Like what tasks is your day occupied with?
hmm Yeah. And I guess the way I would say it is right now you could say I'm a custom knife maker because I am a one man shop. And so any one man shop I would say automatically classifies as like a custom knife maker in a sense.
Right.
But what I'm building is a prototype of a expandable process.
You are
You know what I
building
mean?
you're building a business to scale.
Right.
You're
It's a
building
seed
processes that
yeah.
are able to scale. Whereas a lot of my processes are fully like soul skill based technique,
Yeah.
not scalable.
And if I was to call myself a custom knife maker as like an overarching term, I would be more focused on things like perfecting hand grinding and such
Sure.
things as that.
Sure.
Whereas like with what I'm doing, it's like, well, because that doesn't fit the model that I'm interested in, it's
Right.
not where I'm focused. And so I'm more focused on execution from a automation level,
Right.
which is like that's where I depart. Like that's just where my brain seems to be going a different direction.
Right. It's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I really do think a lot of this comes down to semantics, but as an organizing method for ourselves, I think there's a huge amount of value in it. It
hmm
was when CNC first started to come around, kind of on the scene of makers, and people, there was this thought process that like if you use a CNC, you're not a custom knife maker, you're production. That's like
hmm
a great example of like not understanding that the process even for a given tool can be completely different. So you take someone like Dmitry Sinkovich,
hmm
that is as custom comes
hmm
because of his working method, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
way that he is producing, even though there's CNC involved, it is a very like, I don't know, just every design. I think he makes 3 of a piece before moving on to the next design. So that's
hmm
prime in like R&D,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And the way that he works, the processes, the finishes, and the techniques like all play into like a custom
hmm
kind of
Yeah.
mentality, right?
Yeah. And so I want to reframe it a little bit because now I want to circle back to the fact that like just because I'm describing myself as a manufacturer almost is beside the point because as a manufacturer, I also have to be thinking about, am I in a production versus R&D mindset?
Right.
And so I'm in a production mindset right now, but the R&D mindset would be if I'm contemplating the idea of the next knife, I make the
Right.
fixed blade Overland, I make the Scalpel Plus, and I have another few ideas in the wings that are not developed.
Yeah.
And so for me, switching over would be like, all right, slow down production on these knives that I'm currently making. I have to make new fixtures, finish CAD files, get things going on the next generation on whatever that is.
Yeah.
And when do I make that switch? Where do I allocate that time? I think that's what this conversation is really about, you know?
Right. Which ties into a lot of kind of where I'm at, which is essentially I run three businesses,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Each one of the elements of the business is valuable.
Hmm.
They don't all work in concert smoothly.
Hmm.
So I'm very curious to see how you prioritize R&D moving forward, like if you are doing it on a monthly basis or quarterly.
Hmm.
Kind of the way that I like to think about it a little bit is like it's not a perfect metaphor, but like production puts food on your table, like R&D pays your mortgage.
Hmm.
It's like
Yeah.
it's just a slightly longer term, you know,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
longer term thought process where you
Hmm.
might not get that return right away,
Yeah.
but overall it's a very
Yeah.
important return. Or maybe it's R&D lets you retire. I don't know,
Yeah.
because
Like
it's definitely a long game.
if you order half a beef and have it
Yeah.
processed and put in
Right.
the chest freezer,
Right.
it's like that's the R&D, is like you're
Right.
stacking cordwood, for the winter. But
Right. Well,
it's like the
I guess that part of the thought process is you can get into a production mindset and stay in a production mindset, and you will, if you completely ignore R&D, you start to, if not stand still, like you start to backslide at a point,
yeah, you become
and
one
it's hard to
dimensional.
catch up, right? So
Yeah.
it's really important to figure out a method of kind of maintaining forward momentum,
Yeah.
even though from a purely financial standpoint, you're like, production is really good, I'm going to dig in. But this is that idea of like time management and like looking at your time, like where does value exist?
Mhm. Yeah.
Do you have any idea of what your initial, like right now you're in production? Do you have an idea of when you're going to switch or how you're going to switch to R&D?
So here's the concept of what I'm doing. I describe my shop as the shop itself being a prototype. So the idea is
Okay.
I'm developing processes for the Overland specifically that I want to be replicable, like that I can use again.
Yep.
And so the idea is once the Overland is established to where I'm not solving like large problems repeatedly, where it's like I'm getting to where I'm in the fine minutia of like small improvements. Once I
Mm-hmm.
have that like robust system top to bottom for that knife, then I move on and develop another knife that adopts as much, if not all, of that process as possible. And then that knife, the R&D process will be much shorter because it's predominantly design, right?
Right.
Rev-
The process is existing.
yeah,
All you're doing is plugging in new
new
geometry,
shapes,
yeah,
new
new
looks.
shapes
Yeah.
essentially. And
Hmm.
if you're building something, so if you're building something inside of a family where your construction method is similar to the overland, yeah, you're changing the shape, but your process is dialed, your
Yeah.
finishes,
Yeah.
material handling, all of that.
Yeah, yeah, workflow. So, yeah, that's where I'm at, and I'm close on the Overland because it all came down to having another machine. Like I knew that was going to be an imperative, and so
Right.
that's new. That's the Overlands are going to start running on that new machine within the next couple weeks, and I'll have like a
Right.
new pallet system. And once I feel like I have that like combed through, it's time. It's time for me to. I've got the design actually like 75% done for the next knife,
Mm-hmm.
but I haven't like R&D'd it. I've printed like one, you know what I mean? So it's like I need to put the attention on it for a few weeks, like in the near
Right.
future.
And that's deep work, a few weeks of focusing on that.
Yeah.
Even though you could be kind of multitasking and running some parts,
Yeah.
that's a bad use of your multitasking ability.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Better
There
all
has to
hands
be,
on deck essentially for a
yeah,
new design.
stretched. Yeah, exactly. And that's what I have in mind. So setting the business up to be ready for that pivot is where I'm headed.
Hmm.
And so I don't want to become a one-dimensional type. I don't want to
Right.
become the one knife wonder. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like that's not me because I'm a designer first.
Right.
And so that's what I want to do. But it's the pendulum, knowing when to make the leap from one to the other. That's hard. It's a tough one.
I almost think that, like, for me, I try to do these automated like steps. So it's like you just put it on the calendar,
Yeah.
or the idea of enough, right? Because more is addictive in a way,
Yeah.
and it's subversive. Like
Yeah.
it can hurt you in the long run, because you're like,
Mhm.
okay, so at a point, it's like, how many overlands do you want to make a month? Because you're going to bring out a new product, and then
Mhm.
that, now you just divided your production time in half.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. You do that again. You do
Mhm.
that again. And it's like, it starts to get to the point where, how many products as a manufacturer can you feasibly manage?
Yeah.
Which is part of the, like, where we're at is, we've got my, the stuff that I make in the shop, the projects that I'm managing that are production. And to go back to like mindset thought process for a minute, when we started doing Burnley brand, the term mid tech was really common.
Mhm.
I did something similar to you, which was I moved away from the term mid tech, and any knife that I do under Burnley brand, I consider production.
Yeah.
At that point, I feel like it was almost the same kind of level of decision as calling yourself a manufacturer,
Yeah. Yeah.
because production as a custom knife maker, if you say like, this is a production knife,
Mhm.
at that point, the idea was that it like devalued it somehow.
Yeah. Well, and I think in a sense you're being honest because the this is a side point, but like the word mid tech got really muddied. But
Totally muddied.
to me, the definition was like really crystal clear that it's like
Same.
if you have the parts machined and then you do the assembly as a custom maker, that's a mid
Right.
tech, and that's
That's
the
the way that Ken coined the term.
yeah, and
That
that's
was the way it was used.
the reason the mid is there because it's
Right.
halfway
Yeah.
manufactured and
Middle
halfway custom.
technology. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it became a descriptive word for a price point
Right.
very quickly where it
Right.
was like
Or a
if it's a
number. It's like, if you're doing 300 knives, that's mid tech.
yeah, it became like a size, a price where it's
Yeah.
like you could have, we or Riot make a knife and
Yeah.
you're selling it for 375 and
Yeah.
people were calling them mid-techs even though they were finished knives coming in
Right.
boxes.
Well, and
And that
that terminology changes, right?
yeah, yeah.
At a point.
Mhm.
For us, it was that decision, though, of like guiding principle. If I
Mhm.
was going to say that Burnley brand was my production company, I had to be okay with like making that jump.
Mhm.
And, so there's, over time, there's things that we fully make in-house, or modify in-house. And it was just this easy thing where I was like, I just want to be able to call it production, and I don't want to have to
Mhm.
break it down by piece by piece, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah.
Similar thing. Does it matter? Probably not. Did it help me figure out a way to move forward? Absolutely.
Mhm. Yeah,
Right.
no kidding. Yeah, it's a putting definitions on things is tricky business, but there is some value in that, in like
I think there
actually
is,
establishing like this is what I am. Like it really is what I'm doing,
even if it's
you know.
only for a time period,
Mhm.
right?
Exactly.
Or a being able to shift your mindset from, I'm working in the shop, I'm making knives, this is work, to being able to sit in front of your computer and say, I'm designing a knife, this is work. You and I have talked about that. I've always struggled with anything that is not me physically working with my hands
Mhm.
as work.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
so backwards.
Well, tell me this, like you're trying to get back into the R&D mindset.
Right.
That's your goal. What does that mean for you exactly with R&D? Are you talking new shop designs, like designs that you're going to custom make, or more
I
uh,
think
production stuff?
right, because our ecosystem is like, there's a lot going on in it. So for a few years, we were focused on kind of where you're at now, in a different way. We were doing more numbers. We were doing, production runs of fixed blades in house, but we would be doing like 30 or something. Right.
Hmm.
This was when we had employees. And what I found was that I wasn't enjoying the workflow.
Mhm.
So realizing that my time is finite and I'm looking for a place like where do I value my time the most and where do I enjoy work the most is essentially in the kind of creation of a new design and making a few of them,
Mhm.
because I still really enjoy making, but I spent years, like even when I was working by myself, like there were years where all I was making was Quake and flippers.
Mhm.
And it took me a long time to realize that like I'm not actually at this point production minded
Mhm.
or manufacturing minded.
Right. Right.
Right. It's a more like free flowing creative. I want to be able to jump around. I want to be able to modify. So ideal scenario for me right now is essentially I'm able to shift my focus enough to where I'm spending the time to develop new products. Of those products, maybe a third of them or half of them are things that I'm going to physically produce myself for a
Mhm.
prototype or for a run or for like a small batch for a show. Um, but even that, I'm trying to figure it out. Right. Same thought process of being tied into the Quaken. There were years where a lot of the work I was doing was like essentially CAD and submitting designs of things that I wasn't physically making.
Right. Right.
That doesn't work for me either.
So tell me about your process when you develop a knife. Like let's say a folding knife, maybe it's a frame lock, maybe it's not, whatever. What's step 1?
Sure. Step one, I still like paper and pencil.
Mhm.
I have a pretty extensive backlog of sketches.
Mhm.
A lot of times, what I'll do is I'll kind of go through there, um, and either pick one or use one as kind of inspiration just from like I see some lines that I like and I'll
Mhm.
use it as a starting point. So I generally, I'll sketch. Once I get the sketch to somewhere that I like visuals, I actually go to a light table. So by the time I go into CAD, like I, I've just worked with my hands for so long. Like I could make the knife based off my initial sketches,
Mhm.
pretty close to it.
Mhm.
Everything is almost in there. And then I start converting it to CAD. Where my real kind of stumbling block is at this point is around the CNC and fixturing,
Mhm.
because I haven't devoted enough time to becoming like a good machinist, which, as important as it is for production, I would almost argue that it's like more important if you're an R&D maker,
Right. Yeah.
because you're developing kind of new fixturing each time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And fixturing is relative too. Like the beauty of R&D, like I guess if you're only making 3 of something, is you actually don't have to worry about making like very efficient fixturing.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, like I said, I'm trying to organize my thoughts because some of it's muddy. At this point, I would like to be a better machinist, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
But I'm not wanting to make huge numbers of any one thing. So my process is almost like one of learning and production, where I just stumbled over that, like where I'm going to make 5 of a knife, but I would like to design fixtures like I'm going to make 50 of a knife,
Yeah. Like make
purely
the
so that I can learn.
yeah, have the fixtures be robust, like beyond the needs that you have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And really it's the same thought that you kind of explained to me about setting up CAD files, which is like you want a robust drawing. You want a
Mhm.
robust file, something that you're able to modify,
Mhm.
that if you change one thing, the drawing doesn't break.
Right.
From a modeling standpoint, for a design being sent to like a, CRKT or Boker or something like that, I think that's super, super important. In my shop, I'm like, oh, I can do a 2D design and then figure out how to machine it
Yeah,
still. So that
extrapolate from there.
it's like extrapolate, but that's not like best practice as far as working. So I'm trying to look at like, okay, my output is slightly less, but I'm increasing my ability and my knowledge, future potential for output goes up.
Yeah. for
So
sure.
it's like R&Ding a process for manufacturing as well as the individual models.
Yeah. No, agreed.
That's like
I can
one
see.
component.
No, I can see. I can see where you're going with that. I think that I had a similar mindset when I went into making the Overland. Is like I wanted to bring. I think I mentioned it possibly on the podcast of like I want to bring manufacturing mentality to building this custom knife,
Mm-hmm.
and it became a slippery slope. And here I am, And but in the beginning, I was trying to think about it that way of like just because I only have because I had like one sheet water jet that was only like 14 blanks. And I was like, I want to think of how to make these 14 as efficient as possible because, I mean, in theory, I could have just had them water jet and ground the whole perimeter, you know what I mean? Contoured
Right.
handles on a belt. Like, I
Right.
think I could have built that knife faster, like that first 14. I could
Right.
have built them and finished them faster without going and focusing on like efficiency in the beginning, if that makes
Right.
sense.
You can build one faster. You can't build 100 faster. You
Exactly.
start to lose time on each consecutive piece.
Right, right. And so yeah, it's a tricky game to play because you don't want to build like, oh, I'm going to put a pallet that has all 14 blades on there, right out the
Right.
gate or something. But it's like I can see where you're headed though. It's like you want to have the knowledge of the manufacturing side to help
Right.
with what you're trying to do, but it's
Right.
not so
And
you can wring every last drop out of it.
right. It's not so I can wring the efficiency out of it, but it is, I do think it's really important at this stage. Man, it really is. It's like a loaded thing because part of me like ties what I think of as production to my hand labor
Mhm.
and years of hand grinding blades and like that being production,
Mhm.
with the realization that if I develop more robust systems and efficiencies, I might not mind more production. And as a maker, like I think a lot of us want to satisfy demand, which is great. Our brand at this point, like nothing I ever make in my shop can like come close to satisfying like anything. It doesn't like
Mhm.
we'll drop a run of 200 Cypops on the website and it's 30 seconds.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
a 10-year-old product. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't work, right? So production design satisfies, like when I say production, I mean like, collaborative design
Mhm.
is able to satisfy part of that for me, which is like to get my knives into people's hands,
Yeah. And to everybody that wants one's
into
hands. Yeah.
everybody that wants them. And Burnley brand is actually like a really good outlet for that because, the SQD2 or something, like I'm essentially building a custom, but we're able to hit a lower price point, but still hit the quality and build 500 pieces. And it's like, it's cool to put 500 pieces out on the market,
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
know? So I'm kind of struggling with some of the thought processes around like where my time is best spent now. So I think like if I really had to make it like a simple version, it would be I'm designing and making knives, submitting the like small batch, submitting those designs for production for larger numbers.
Mhm.
While doing that, increasing my personal efficiency out of the shop.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
We'll see.
Yeah. No,
I mean,
dream
it's
big,
like
man. I like it.
well, and where also does R&D, is it only knives and
And that's a good
hard
question.
goods,
That's a good question because there's
right?
NFTs. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
but
There's dropping soon.
yeah,
Uh,
but
but really, like in our brand, there's so many products
mhm,
that is not a knife and is not a hard good that those all require development and imagery, logos, branding, like whatever it is, like the ODC, like the little pouch we just did. That was a fully R&D. We just did the first R&D drop of that project, the
right.
first production run.
Yeah. No, that was really cool. I
Took
want to hand
time.
one of those.
Took time.
They're
I need to
sweet.
just send.
Yeah.
I'll just send you one.
Those are awesome.
So yeah,
W-
like I guess one of the questions that I've been having or fielding for myself is like hours in a day, days in a week or month. How much time is devoted to production or development? How do
right.
you categorize it? How do you place a value on it?
So I've been witness to times where other businesses or things that I've seen in other businesses where people the common tendency I see is actually to over develop new products, and that
Agreed.
is probably the bigger killer as opposed to as to underdeveloping products, I guess, if that makes sense. Like fully fleshing out a product and fully getting it to market with full efficiency and full marketing force and full attention to detail is a lot of work. And I think it's common to like overextend with too many ideas, too many products, too wide, too big of a cut. And I'm actually resisting the urge to overdevelop. So like I feel like I'm preparing for that next round of R&D, but
Mm-hmm.
it's the approach I have to it is not pushing myself towards it. It's actually holding myself back because
Interesting.
I've seen it go wrong where it's like a product is finally finished and it's like it never got a chance to be what it could have been because the next product came and replaced it or whatever. You know what I
I've
mean?
said like for years, I'm like, I don't want to be necessarily prolific. I want to be iconic. Like I want my
Yeah.
designs to stand on their own.
Yeah.
When you think about custom knives, and it's really interesting because I'm going to throw a production knife out as my first custom, right?
Mhm.
Which is the Sabenza.
Yeah.
When you think about products like that, that is a prime example of something that is like, it was designed, it was good. And then there's iterations of it. It was given time to grow and build a
Mhm.
following, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Like a custom analogy kind of would be like you do a knife show and you put 50 knives on your table. People don't see your knives.
Mhm.
Like they don't see any given knife. They just
Yeah.
see
A C.
mass. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
C. They can't
Yeah.
focus.
Yeah.
All right.
So too many
It's a
shiny
similar,
things.
I think it's
Yeah.
kind of a similar thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. I would say that at small scale, it's harder to do that just because of the necessary timeline of you like making a new model. Yeah, sure. The risk for you would almost be making a new model and never coming back to the Overland,
Yeah. Yeah. That's the
right?
hard part. And the hard part is like, what if I never got the Overland to its fullest efficiency level? If that
Right.
makes sense. So if I start anew with like a new set of processes, and they're not all the processes will be new, but it's like I've built a lot of fixtures for the Overland and I've yet more to build. And
Right.
it's like right when I finish that, do I do a hard 90 and then put them all on the shelf and let them collect dust? You know
Well,
what I
and
mean? It's like,
really, you're making the prime argument for manufacturing, right? Which is
mhm,
I don't have time to make Overlands right now. I need one more machine and I need an operator.
mhm, yeah,
The techniques used to build that knife are teachable.
mhm.
The demand is there for the output.
And
That's the way that you ensure that it's not a year and a half before you come back to the Overland.
yeah, and what I've found is here's what makes me happy. Here's what I enjoy, and that thing is solving problems. Like that's what I when I wake up and I know there's a problem I have to solve, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like conceivable that I could solve it. Like I have ideas of how it could be solved, and then when I execute and it's solved,
Mm-hmm.
that is like the best feeling for me. Even more, I guess, euphoric than even like designing. So that's
Right.
where if I go and I'm sitting in front of a machine or if I'm in the shop and there's a process that's like a bottleneck, it's an issue, this issue keeps coming up, and I start putting my nose to the grindstone on a fixture, on a concept, on a new type of media, and I finally find the formula that works,
Mm-hmm.
and then I move on to the next problem and I solve that problem. And so where I'm going to get to is where the Overland, like once I've solved enough problems where there aren't the big fun problems to solve anymore on it, that's when I'm gonna want to feed myself a new set of problems. You know what I mean? And so it's like
Interesting.
there's enough
So you
problems with the
right.
Overland for me to still feast. You know what I
That's a
mean?
really interesting way of looking at it. That's like almost like Toyota kind of mindset, right?
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
design the thing, make continual improvements,
Yeah.
right? So at the point where you run out of things to solve, that project can stand on its own. You feel
hmm
you have the space to maybe move on to the next project.
Yep. Exactly.
It's nice because it's actually very trackable.
Mhm.
That's something I've been working on for myself is like, is it an emotional decision or is it like a decision based in kind of data,
Mhm.
right? Is there a
Yeah.
reason for it? Like, do you have a reason
Right.
for your argument? Is it
Mhm.
backed up?
Yeah.
So,
And
huh.
and
Okay.
I think the plan though on the next knife is like 90 to 95% of the problems I'm solving right now will be the same solves for the next
Right.
knife, but I want to have another 5 to 10% of new problems. And you know what I mean on that next one? Like
Right.
I want it to be that way because I don't want it to be cookie cutter. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
I want to have that new vein of like things that I have to push for. And so it's
Right.
like, but if you my only problem with doing that too soon, like I said, is like if you have too many problems to solve too much and you know are behind on all these problems, then like businesses struggle. You know what I mean? It's like there's just too many problems and
Right.
too many
Or
diversions. You know
you
what I mean?
struggle. That's like, I would say
Yeah.
that's probably where I fall into more often than not is kind of too many irons in the fire because I get super excited about projects or learning something new. But I have a hard time sometimes following a line of thought all the way to completion,
hmm Yeah, and
um, or a
that's what I've tried to
project.
be particularly disciplined in doing that because I'm in the same way. Like I like to diversify with all my
Hmm.
thoughts and dreams and goals and ideas. And this last couple years has been like a I want to distill it down. Like this is the goal. You know what I mean?
Let me ask you something about problem solving. Do you have a sense of how far out you solve problems?
In the into
Is
the
it
future.
if yeah, does that make sense? So like here's the thought process, right? You are bandsawing a knife, you're hand cutting a knife out of bar stock with a hacksaw.
hmm
And you're like, man, this would be way faster if I got a bandsaw. You could go and get a bandsaw, and you're absolutely right. Or you could look at the bandsaw and say, well, actually, going to water jet would be much faster than going to a bandsaw, right?
Right.
Where in the process I think your process is like in your own capabilities, like your problem solving. This is that idea of like almost creating too much efficiency, which is like if you create too much efficiency, you ultimately don't do it yourself,
hmm
right?
Right.
Like you'd say, well, instead of doing the bevels in house, I'm going to send them to Larkin.
hmm
Well, since I'm sending why am I going to machine my scales? I'll send those out. That's like
hmm
you over efficiency to the point where you actually don't get to solve the problems or make the parts,
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
right? So
And
that's not your goal. So you do
no.
have a stopping point for your problem solving.
hmm Yeah. Yeah. So you're talking about like how many problems am I thinking about in the future that are not yet on my plate? Is that the
Ooh,
question?
yeah, maybe. Like,
Uh,
yeah, how far are you projecting?
well, ev- generally, a lot of problems that I have involve the difference between the way I'm doing it now and the difference and how I could be doing it that I believe is the solution is often money. You know, so it's
Right.
like a big part of it is like what improvement can I afford to make right now, and it's like I'm going to make as many as I can afford to make, and like that one large part of that comes down to like my square footage. It's like
Right.
I have to do what's possible in my square footage because that's what I have right now.
Hmm.
And so a lot of the things I have solutions like in mind for different things that are going to be when I have more square footage that are going to be like automatic, like buy that thing as soon as I have the square footage. But
Right.
I'm solving problems in a bubble right now of that size of shop. And so
Hmm.
it's like I have like ideas in the future of solves, but this solve is the one for now.
For now.
And
Right.
so, like you've said before, yes, but later kind of focus. But
Yeah.
my brain
Yeah.
solves problems like it's to the point of almost being like toxic. Like I find problems when there's not problems. I just like if my I like to chew on problems all the time,
Right.
and that's just what makes me happy.
It's because you're a robot
I think so. I don't know.
or Elon Musk. I don't
I'm a
know.
reptilian.
You might be a
Yeah.
reptilian.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. This is one of the strangest times in my career, just because I actually have options,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
and so trying to kind of figure out, like asking myself, like what do I want my days to look like?
Mhm.
You
Do you
know,
like solving problems?
I don't. I think there's some level that like I must like solving problems, but I wouldn't. I obviously don't feel as strongly about it as you do. Like I don't know
Mhm.
if that's like my driving force.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, that changes though too, right?
Yeah.
I think for me, we've talked about the game of knife before. Making knives was my introduction into this industry. At this point in the industry, there are so many things that are interesting to me that I almost don't differentiate between like making a knife versus like coming up with a t-shirt design or like
Mhm. Mhm.
figuring out like the ODC or something, right? Like a
Yeah.
project or
And general brand development and
in
stuff.
like brand development, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
I realize that doesn't probably make a ton of sense. Like there's obviously a difference, but I think I get at this point, I get this almost the same satisfaction. The caveat to that is there is a point where I stop. If I do one thing for too long, I stop getting satisfaction from it.
Mhm.
And at different points in my career, like talking about the Kwaiken, there were times where, man, I was just buried in those, you know,
Mhm.
when I still took orders, when I was doing a lot of shows and realizing like, man, I am feeling super drained and not creatively satisfied.
Mhm.
It's almost like taking breaks throughout the day. I think that shifting your focus of work makes your overall work better,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
At this point with kids and kind of other obligations, I'm trying to figure out the method of how to arrange the time. So for me, I'm like, how often should I be doing R&D? You
Mhm.
know, maybe it's a 2 week block. Like I feel like I could develop a knife in 2 weeks. I feel like if I was to develop a knife and have it ready to machine, I'm probably looking at a month.
Mhm. Yeah.
That feels right for me.
Yeah.
Somewhere
Yeah.
in there.
That's reasonable, yeah.
So, where do you pull that month? Do you space it out over the course of 6 months, a week at a time?
That's tough, man. That's like I said, I have the horizon coming of this taking on this next R&D project.
Right.
For me, because of the route that I'm going, I'm putting my finger on the pulse of the business of
Right.
like, when am I not behind on orders? When do I have a little bit of breathing room to do it? And the more efficient I'm getting, the more I can see that coming of like I said, once the efficiency's there, where the overlands, I can still maintain a level of production, at least to some degree. Maybe not like on a day to day or week to week basis, but at least like there's enough throughput that I can take a couple weeks off from it and not
Right.
like go massively behind.
Well, and that
Um,
that can be scheduled, right? That's the idea of
yeah.
enough. So, if the first week of the month you made the amount of overlands, which is impossible, that you need to make that month,
Hmm.
you would have 3 weeks to delegate
Right.
for yourself in different ways.
So let me ask you this: in your mind, when you think of R&D, what all's bundled into that? Because like for me, when I think R&D, like designing the fixed blade, if it's a fixed blade that I do next, isn't very much work. Like I'm
Right.
efficient in CAD to where I can develop a fixed blade like really fast, you
Right.
know? It doesn't really, it's not taxing for me to like squeeze developing a fixed blade in during a production schedule. But for
Right.
me, I wrap also like designing the sheath and actually being able to make it with the fixturing for that,
Right.
designing the fixture to make the blades, setting up bevels, setting up cam,
Right.
getting tooling figured out
You're
like
actually
that.
you're taking it so much further in efficiency than I am, and you're
Right.
also probably doing
Well,
that faster.
and for me, the R&D, the big gulp to take is that part of it, is these tooling up, is the building the
Right.
fixtures, is the getting it produced, is the getting the website to hold that knife with the right photos, with the right descriptions. You know what I mean? Is like getting a product ready for market. It's not really like designing it for me, you know?
Right. Yeah, I guess I feel like I could do design anytime,
Hmm.
like hour in the evening. I can do that. Like I could be
Hmm.
designing a new model. Um yeah, I guess I don't really know where I get stuck on it. I think it's it's like the cumulative task of producing something new at this
Mhm.
point,
Mhm.
from drawing to first pieces.
Yeah.
And really, I think it's just, in my case, I think it's an issue of like over leveraging my time.
Mhm.
Um, so same for you though, almost, where it's like, there's a point where I need to say like, enough is enough, like, of this type of work.
Mhm.
Now this becomes a priority.
Yeah.
Or having like a design output goal, like, all right, I would like to be able to submit 1 to 2 new models to each company that I design for annually.
Mhm.
So you have 4
Yeah.
knives, you
And
know.
so you prefer a schedule of some description over a gut feeling type thing?
No, I would say that I work towards scheduling because it's not my natural state. And
Mhm.
really, a lot of times there's years where it's like mid-year I come up with some concept and like play with it and get really excited, and that's a submission. It's like so it's not like as cut and dried as like, oh,
Mhm.
4 designs a year and this is the way
Yeah.
it works. You
Yeah.
never know when that like spark is going to hit,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
It's like the name any art form and there's the writer's block, the muse, the
Right.
every industry has its own description for like that captivating moment where you create a creative flow and whatnot and how to do it.
Right.
Because R&D, like when I think about the R&D side that I'm describing, where it's like getting it ready for the mill, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Where it's like I'm actually making it, that I don't have to wait or like try to develop an environment where I can do that. It's like I can just do it.
No, that's
I know.
technical.
Yeah.
That's technical.
It,
And again, your proficiency is greater than mine. So I think that in a lot of ways that is a more daunting task to me because it's not efficient, right?
right.
So hence back to the original conversation, which is like, what is it that I'm actually trying to do R&D on?
Yeah.
Is it even a product,
Yeah.
or
Or is it
is
the
it a
process?
process?
Yeah.
And these are the shades of like gray that I think it can be really cut and dry to be like, oh, like I make knife, like
Hmm.
I make another
Yeah.
knife, right?
I, there's a quote I heard that I really like. It's at least part of the quote is you always fall to the level of your processes.
Right. Or your training. You don't rise to the
Yeah,
occasion, you fall to your training,
exactly.
right?
And in manufacturing, no matter what the dream, the goal, the sales, the marketing, the everything, you
Right.
will always fall to what are your processes.
Right.
And so for me, it's like that's why delegate or spending so much time on the processes with the Overland
Yeah.
is like it's got to be bulletproof. Like it's got to
Right.
be dialed. You know what I mean?
Well, and
And so,
your method at this point actually has another big benefit, which is a long time ago, a good friend of mine, Derek Obatake, from Steel Flame, had told me, like, if you build a business, build it to sell.
hmm.
It doesn't matter if you ever plan on selling your business, like you leave it to your kids or close it when you retire.
Well, we
But
both named our brands after our last name, so
I know,
that was a bad start.
kind of
Yeah.
tied in.
Yep.
You know what though? Not a deal breaker in a lot of
Yeah.
cases.
Yeah.
But the concept behind that, I think, is really that if your business it has the ability to be sold, it has to be running functionally and efficiently.
Hmm. Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you're going
Like
to sell it.
if you personally are this keystone that when
Yeah.
removed, it all collapses.
Right.
It's
Well,
not
that's the
saleable.
argument that
Yeah.
you're not a business. You're
Yeah.
self-employed.
Right.
So I am self-employed with like these weird like toeholds in other areas with
Hmm.
passive income and stuff.
Right.
But you are actually developing a process that you could exist as a company without you.
Exactly. That's the goal. And the reason for that goal again is if I solve a bunch of problems on a product like the Overland
Right.
and I'm done solving you're never done, but like
Right.
when I
Never done.
get to the point of diminishing returns where there's not huge like it's just running, it's smooth, then I would like to train someone to be able to help me with that
Right.
and find a new set of problems. And like that is the endeavor. And so it's like just what you're describing is like I'm handing things off in theory in the future. Like that's kind of the vision going
Mm-hmm.
on. But it all revolves around me solving new problems. So it's like that's the foundation. It's not that I necessarily want I like I don't look at manufacturing and say that's what I want because it's like glorious and it'd be cool to have.
Sure.
It's because it's the environment that allows me to solve problems every day
Mm-hmm.
and then take those solutions and hand them to my right hand man for
Right.
the continuation of those, for the execution of that.
Absolutely. Well, and in reality, I think we are constantly looking at our time, and at least I do. I would assume you do, and most of us probably do, right? Of where is my time best spent?
Hmm.
That is that shifts, right?
Hmm.
In my 20s, my time was best spent trying to make as many knives as I could and get my name out and make as much money as I could to move forward into like the next stage of my life.
Hmm.
At this stage, I don't want to work and I don't need to work like I did when I was 25. And I
Hmm.
have different criteria of for myself of like what is success and like what is important.
Hmm.
Like we always come back to the kid thing, man. It's like there's a point where I'm like, it doesn't like a little more money doesn't matter if it's like taking more time from my family.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. So
yeah.
there's these balance points. And I think that like the method that you're doing, what's cool about it with the idea of scaling, which again, we tried to do where we ran into the problem was I lacked management. We got to a point where there was an efficiency of output. The problem was my time was eaten up managing and kind of providing almost backup support and providing like support planning for the employees.
Yeah.
Whereas if there was some type of intermediate management, right, that's where I
Mhm.
would have actually been able to scale.
Mhm.
So product management and I mean, in certain ways, a foreman does that, right, for the shop
Mhm.
floor.
Mhm.
Project manager for the production side of the business,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? But your method at some point allows you to look and say, hey, my time is not best spent on the shop floor. I can shift fully into research and design, business development, relationship building, like
Mhm.
because you are the face of the brand. These are the things that scale with a business that take time that we don't necessarily account for,
Right. Right.
right?
And I will say though, the idea of me not being on the shop floor is something I hope never happens because I
Right.
think the solving the problems on the shop floor is me.
Yeah.
So it's almost like if I was going to get more help in a broad scale, I would want more help on the business development side,
As
and I would
opposed
stay
to,
as opposed to me getting out of the shop and doing that. It would be the other way around. You know what
yeah.
I
And
mean? Like,
I agree with you 100%. Maybe I just have a hard time letting go of things. I
right.
like to make things.
Hmm.
However, I would have a harder time letting go of strategic planning
Hmm. Oh yeah.
in a
Oh
way.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
at the
Yeah.
same time, if all I was doing was that like strategic planning, I would lose my mind.
Yeah. Hmm.
I need to. So yeah, maybe maybe I'm trying to like in my brain, it's almost like all or nothing
Hmm.
where there's a more kind of homogenous approach that is it's what you do now scaled with support,
Hmm. Yeah.
but it doesn't fully remove you from any one area of the business. That would be like
Hmm.
that would almost be the ideal, right?
If I was setting up machines and building fixtures and
Yeah.
running like the first 10 of everything,
Yeah.
and then someone else was operating the machine,
Yes.
that would be it for me. You know what I
So
mean?
in our tiny business of me and my wife, right? I still think about like job titles in a way. And
Hmm.
like in if I was to scale a business, I guess really where I would want to be is like I would want to be a creative director
Hmm.
almost, right? So the way that I would see it is like, okay, so there's some huge company and I'm in like a cell
Mhm.
that has some machines and a computer. I'm basically in
Yeah.
my own shop
Yeah.
with the support of manufacturing.
Yeah.
And I'm able to say, hey, I want to do this like winter collection of clothing. Here's my initial sketches, and like hand it off to someone who is able to actually, proceed on that
Yeah.
and like
Execute. Yeah.
execute. Like,
Yeah.
here it is.
Do
Here's
the
the
product
idea.
management. Yeah.
Right. So I guess ultimately, like you had asked, like, do I like problem solving? I'm like, ultimately, I like coming up with ideas.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's
Yeah.
for me, that's the, like, where I really feel the spark is when I come up with something and I'm like, oh, I'm super excited to make that. And people are really going to enjoy it.
I think that's where we differ because I
I
think
do
that's
too.
I think it's cool for me. Like I like coming up with new ideas, but
Hmm.
it doesn't hit me nearly as hard as solving problems. Is like especially when it comes to making things like fixing issues in the shop that
Right.
are problematic are
Right.
just addicting to me. Like it's just if a machinist that I was paying to work for me had an issue with a fixture and he's like, "Hey man, this fixture's just not working out." It doesn't make me mad like, I got more work to do. I got to do this." For me, it's like immediately gears turning like, "Oh, this pin it's undersized. It's a problem. Okay, solve the problem." Like that's how I just want to live. You know what I mean? Like that's
This is super
bring
interesting. So,
bring all your problems to me and I'll solve them. Like that's how I want to be in the shop.
oh yeah, I think we figured out like there's
Yeah.
like a big shift, right? So, um, my good friend Joe Mangiafico, who worked
Hmm.
for us for a couple of years. I know he's been listening to this podcast. So if you are, man, just
Nice.
a shout out to
What's
my
up, Joe?
buddy. Yeah, you guys should check out his knives because they are awesome. He is a very hard worker. Okay. And he's efficient.
Hmm.
Us working together, I know he had to wait for me a lot of time because I would get distracted with an idea.
Hmm.
That's where that middle management component really was
Hmm.
like almost necessary. He wanted to be able to work consistently through numbers. And I
Hmm.
would be like doing something and then like, oh, there's Luke like skipping off because he had like some weird spark of an idea.
Hmm.
I think a lot of times in our businesses, like figuring out your strengths and just like working towards them may be more efficient than figuring out your weaknesses and trying to like shore them up.
Yeah. Yeah. Double down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like double
Take
down.
take what you got and like magnify it. Yeah.
Right. And it's hard because like we all have holes in our game. That's like
Hmm.
it's just the
Hmm.
nature of being a human,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. The problem with that is you can't necessarily, even if you're not going to like work on your weaknesses, you can't let them affect the overall business. So
Yeah.
we find solutions,
Yeah. Yep.
right? Workarounds or people that you work with or people that
Yeah.
the ideal
Delegate.
scenario. That's why you and I would be a very good team, probably in almost anything we do, because we
Hmm.
actually fulfill very different roles and have a completely different process.
Right. Right. No, I
So if
agree.
you have 3 or 4 people that provide different assets, I think you're
Hmm.
very well rounded. If
Yeah.
I were to build a company at this point, I would be looking to build it with people that had skill sets that supported and shored up
Contrasted you.
they
Yeah.
were full contrast,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
No, for sure. Yeah, and all this being said, like I'm not like putting out an ad to hire someone right now because my shop square footage is gonna honestly, I don't even know if it'd be smart to even have an employee other than like some part-time help with the size of my shop. But again, it's like, what am I prototyping in this shop? Is this what it's going to be, or is
Well,
this
you've
just
already said that you're prototyping the business,
yeah, exactly.
right?
And so the idea in
So
my head
I
is
would make the yeah,
if once I have the ability to spread out a little bit, have a bathroom specific to the shop, have the
right,
ability to have employees come and go, it's like this is what this employee would do, this is what this employee would do. Like that's what I'm thinking while I'm doing
right.
what I'm doing. Not me doing it. Like I'm thinking about how I would prepare this for it to be done by help.
Right.
Yeah.
Laying it out, making order op sheets, making
Yeah.
like, hey, here's where you find the information about this job. Here's where you
Yeah.
find the tooling list,
Well,
even though you don't need a tooling list for the job that you're doing, maybe.
right. And I've been developing some processes like that, like developing a work order. So it's like I'll create a work order and I'll take it to the shop and I'll do it, even though it's me writing it and doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's like stuff like that. And then also like an ERP system. I don't know if you've heard of them.
Uh-uh.
But it's like if you have a bigger shop, let's say you have a lot of employees, and let's say you go through a lot of things, like maybe it's not all product oriented, like maybe some of it is like trash bags, some of it is
Right.
like this and that. It's like everything that is a consumable slash a functional part of your product is part of this computer system, that it's like you have your
Right.
own internal part numbers for everything. And then that's where you get like, that's lean manufacturing, where they create like mechanisms where like if you you get 2 rolls of trash bags, you put them on the shelf, you put a barcode on each of them that's
Mm-hmm.
associated with those. You take one off, everything you use in the shop that's out of a package or off the shelf, you scan it, it tells the system that you're down one, and then it creates an automatic PO and orders another one. And so you
Oh, I
always have
love that
two.
so much.
And it's called an ERP. To my knowledge, I may have rudimentary knowledge, but I've already been thinking about like building one of those for my
Mm-hmm.
shop, even though it's
Well, you
just
can do
me.
like, even I've done stuff like that where you like create flags and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
we talked about it a little bit in the beginning of the
Mhm.
episode, right? Which is like automate anything you can, and
Yeah.
automate mechanism, switch, like anything
Mhm.
that you can think of where you're like, oh, I'm at the back of this. I just got to this card. That means I automatically reorder end mills.
Yeah. Yep.
You're eliminating decision making.
Exactly.
Right.
And
We just had a conversation this morning. So Maddie and I have like a weekly kind of product and sales meeting.
mhm.
And one of the things that we're doing is we're starting to set up like, hey, we just realized like it's been, a year since we ordered patches. And it's
Mhm.
like, okay. So you basically work backwards. You're like, how often would we like to sell a patch? What is the production time of a patch? What's the development? And like, if we're creating a new graphic for that patch, when do we need
Mhm.
this process of starting
Yeah.
a new patch?
Yeah.
Even just adding it to Google Calendar,
Just
where
a
you get an
framework.
automatic
Yeah.
reminder. You don't have to remember it.
Yeah. Yep. That's
I
awesome.
think,
Beautiful.
yeah, I think so. Creating systems like that around, man, almost
And
anything you can.
and for me, the idea, again, back to like what excites me, is like the thought of building an ERP system sounds so freaking fun. Like it's
Same.
like
That
it, I
that sound. Yes, I have like a definite drive towards a certain type of like organization.
mhm. Yeah.
Um, if you ask Joe, he would tell you that I move the shop around a lot because I get excited about the idea of like a different workflow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, man, it's funny. I'm thinking about Joe because I talked to him today.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put him on blast because he has made the decision to go full time
Dude, that's awesome.
knife making.
Yeah, I've met him one time at the last Blade
Yep.
show we were at.
Yeah, you've met Joe.
Awesome guy. Yeah, really
Yep.
awesome guy.
So
I'm happy for him. I'll have to
yeah,
reach out, talk to him.
yeah, for sure,
That's
man.
awesome.
He's a good dude. I'm very, very excited. A lot of
Yeah,
conversations. So
fantastic.
yeah,
I love to hear it.
congrats, Joe.
That full-time like official move, when I
Yeah.
hear of a friend or someone I know like do
Yeah.
that, it's almost like a christening of a ship. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
it's a big
hooray.
deal.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of like felt very similar to you saying that you're identifying yourself as like a manufacturer.
Yeah.
It's like you are
It's
staking
the label.
something. You're like,
Yeah.
I believe in myself.
Yeah.
I believe in what I'm doing,
hmm
and I'm gonna
Yeah.
I'm gonna bet on my capabilities.
Totally.
It's awesome.
Listen, man, I gotta go. There's a cross country meet, and my
Let's call it.
father-in-law is actually the coach. And the cool thing is, the meet, they run past our front yard,
Nice.
so we're like get to spectate from our front yard. So
I love it. Sit out front with a beer.
I got to catch that. So
all right, man. Have a good one, guys. Thanks for listening. As always, if you share the podcast with a friend, leave us a review.
Yeah,
anything helps. We appreciate y'all.
We love the stories, the Instagram posts, the links and stuff, man. It's so cool to see and hear you guys just kind of talking about it, and
leave us a comment.
What you guys think.
And let us know. Tag us if you're doing R&D or you're starting to do some production. We want to know.
And where are we way off? What are we missing here?
Yeah, what are we missing?
What's our blind spot? I want to hear it.
Yeah, what's the third leg?
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Take it easy,
Peace,
guys.
everybody.